Hi, welcome to another week of English 101. This week I want to talk about a couple kinds of papers that you might have to write. The first one I want to talk about is cause and effect. You ever played dominoes where you set them all up? I know a lot of times it takes longer to set them up than actually push them down, but it's a really fun thing to do. So you set them all up, you push the first one, and then one by one they topple down. Well, that's kind of what cause and effect is. There's an initial cause that does something, and then that something has an effect of what has been done. And so we look at something like, Bill had a bad day. Well, what happened because Bill had a bad day? Well, he yelled at his wife. Well, what happened because he yelled at his wife? Well, then she goes and yells at the children. What happens because she yelled at the children? Well, they have a horrible night, aren't able to sleep. So what happens because of that? The next day they do poorly on a test. That sort of thing. That is cause and effect. In a live classrooms, a lot of times, I will do something called Rodney King and the LA riots. Well, I'll write that on the board and then I ask them, what was the cause and what was the effect? Well, depending on how you'd want to write this paper, and students always look at it differently, you might want to start with the fact that Rodney actually took a drink and got in his car to drive. Well, that caused the high-speed chase. And then, the effect of that is that, the cops pull him over, they end up beating him, and then because they beat him, there's this trial, and then because of that trial, the different, jurors, they say that, the cops are innocent because they say they're innocent. There ends up being this big LA riot because of racism, and then you have people that, lose their homes, things are on fire, people lose their jobs, people die. It's just a really, really bad situation. All right. Depending on where you write this paper, and each student has a different way of looking at it, you determine where's the initial cause that you want to write about. Obviously, that's way too much to write about. There's no way to write that entire paper if you really want to get into it. So you'd have to narrow it down. Do you want to talk about the fact that he did drinking and driving? You could start there, and then you'd have three, effects of drinking and driving. The high-speed chase, the beating, and then, something else. Or you could start farther down and say, well, the cops, the way they handled it was the effects of what happened. Or do you want to start at the verdict, which is where most people like to start because that's the meatiest part of this, is the actual verdict of innocence. When there, really a lot of people felt that it wasn't the jury of their peers, and so that's what caused this racism riots that actually took over the city for a while. So wherever you decide to start, whatever cause you want to start with, then you start to do the different effects. All right, so you can use the bubble method, just like I taught you, last week, is that you put basically whatever your cause is in the middle of the circle, and then your three lines coming off of it become your three effects. And like I said, you have to kind of narrow it down to the top effects. You don't want to have too much, because if you have too much, the paper will just be too big and you won't be able to do it. So you basically organize it effectively. List out the different causes, narrow down to the top three, focus on the effects of those causes, and then narrow down the top effects of each one. And then eventually you can get to a nice, tight paper. All right, so that's the first paper. The second one I want to talk about is compare and contrast. Do you remember Venn diagrams? I'm going to show you one actually right here. And this is a Venn diagram about apples and oranges. You've heard, compare apples and oranges. Well, we're going to do just that. A Venn diagram is a great way of, if you have to do a compare and contrast paper, of looking quickly at the material. So if you look at the circles, apples are red and smooth. Well, neither oranges or kiwis are red and smooth, so that's why they are not included in that part of the circle. Oranges are orange and bumpy. Well, neither one of the other two are orange and bumpy, so it's in its own circle. And the same goes for kiwis being brown and furry. Now, if you look at it, apples and kiwis are both sweet, so they touch at that point. Oranges and kiwis are both tropical and have the same climate, whereas apples are, more up in the rainy places like Washington or something. So they are not touching right there. And then if oranges and apples are usually pretty cheap, but kiwis can be kind of expensive. So notice that the cheap touches on apples and oranges. But all three of them are fruit. All three of them are edible, that sort of thing. That's what would go in the center. So that's how you do a Venn diagram. So if you're asked by your professor, I need you to do a compare and contrast paper, that's a quick way to find what's good and what's, what's the same and what's different about each thing you're going to do. There's different ways to write these papers. You can do it where you compare and contrast each thing, like for instance, the red, the orange, and the brown, all the colors are in one paragraph. And then the next paragraph is about, the texture. And the third paragraph would be about the taste. That'd be one way of doing it. Or you could talk all about apples, talk all about oranges, and talk all about kiwis, and then in your conclusion, you come to a conclusion which one is better. Or you can do it where you talk about all three of them together at the same time, comparing, contrasting all the way through it. So I always say, pick the one that works best for you. Those are the three different ways that you can do them. And they are great papers to write. They're really fun to write, so I hope you enjoy them when it comes time to do it. All right. There's really two reasons to do it. One is to evaluate, and the other one is to explain. Sometimes you just want to explain why you started eating apples all of a sudden. I just think they're really sweet, and I wanted to kind of explain why I'm shopping at that particular store. Another thing is to evaluate. Which apple or oranges or kiwi, which one should I eat? So you look at the three different things. Maybe you build in vitamins and maybe you're missing vitamin C, so you come to the conclusion, maybe oranges is the one I'm supposed to do, that sort of thing. So depending on what you're needing to do, you would either explain or evaluate, and that's where compare and contrast can come in really handy. That's about all I have for you this week. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you only one more week to go. God bless.